What do you get when you cross a spaghetti western with Legacy of Kain? Well, you get Darkwatch. Slightly unknown and arguably underrated first-person shooter released in 2005 by High Moon Studios for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. And if you haven't heard of it, well, I think that's fine. It's not the kind of game that every man and his dog knows about. But those who played it will probably tell you that it's something pretty damn unique. Is that the case though? Well, Sonny Jim, I'm so glad you asked. Let's just find out then, shall we? Now, Darkwatch doesn't spend any time dicking around. As soon as the game begins, you're controlling the protagonist, Jericho Cross, a notorious outlaw that looks like Caleb from the Blood games if Tim Burton never got a hold of him. Anyway, in the prologue of the game, Jericho succeeds in robbing a train, but instead of ending up with a big score, he unknowingly releases a powerful vampire named Lazarus, that also has the nasty side effect of bringing to life a bunch of horrible other creatures that do his bidding. He also has to deal with the fact that he's turning into a vampire himself thanks to Lazarus sucking on his neck, and decide whether or not to hang on to the shreds of whatever soul he's got left or give in to his animalistic urges. The goal then becomes to head off and join up with the eponymous Darkwatch Order, an ancient group of vampire hunters that are the only means of ending the whole shitstorm. Helping him out is a woman named Cassidy, voiced by Jennifer Hale.
The curse, it's taken hold.
And then later on, another vampire hunter named Tala, voiced by Rose McGowan, before she went fucking crazy. And both of these characters represent the good and the bad side in Jericho.
Don't talk much, do you? That's alright. I've always gone for the tall, dark, and bloodthirsty type.
Throughout the game, you're constantly facing these black and white moral choices, which always just boil down to either killing someone or not killing them. And the path you choose is going to affect what kind of powers you get to play around with. The basic abilities you get for just being a vampire is a shield that recharges when you're not taking damage, and also a double jump that kind of makes it feel like you're jumping on the moon because of just how oddly slow it is. But the other choices you make throughout the storyline decide what your other skills get to be. So if you go the good path, your power's going to be Silver Bullet, which is increased weapon damage, Mystic Armor, which is a shield that absorbs damage, then there's a Fear Bomb that scares off enemies. Finally, there's Vindicator, which is the ability to shoot chain lightning that just bounces from enemy to enemy. Which I think is by far the best power in the game, just because it pretty much one-shots everything, including your mum.
Schwacked.
On the evil side of things, you've got Blood Frenzy, which is increased melee damage. There's Black Shroud, which is just another shield, and then there's Turn, which makes enemies fight alongside you. And then lastly, you've got Soul Stealer, this big arc of energy that kills whatever it touches, like your mum.
Schwacked.
Most of these powers are alright, though I do think Turn is easily the most useless power in the entire game, and just pretty much a waste. Black Shroud 2 is a better version of Mystic Armor, I think, because it actually damages enemies who attack you. And the jury's out on Blood Frenzy and Silver Bullet. I mean, it just depends on which you prefer. I think I'd probably go with Blood Frenzy just because the melee attacks are so satisfying. Pretty obvious when you come to the moments when you have to make these moral decisions, and it's either going to break down to you playing the game like an absolute Boy Scout or just being a complete dickhead and treating everyone you come across like shit. Regardless of which kind of style you go for though, you then also have to choose who to side with for the game's ending. An option you're always given though, it seems, regardless of how much you stray down either path. Without spoiling anything, you're basically just choosing one of the female characters, and it's more than just choosing either blonde or brunette, even though we both know brunette is the correct answer.
You wanna live forever?
And for a while, Darkwatch is pretty damn good. The opening few levels are really awesome, like you're starting off with this cool train robbery, then you're riding on a vampire horse, shooting over your shoulder at skeletons. Eerie light shines from the ground as creatures tear their way to the surface. You'll move through creepy caves, cemeteries and crypts, and the moon hangs low in the evening sky as you take on undead gunslingers and banshees. Darkness falls across the land, the midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize your neighborhood. Every aspect of this game's presentation just oozes with style and charm, and even for its time and considering what it's running on, I think you'll just be amazed at just how artistic the game can often look. I mean, it's proof that creativity like this is the sort of thing that just never ages. Now, I caught all of my footage on a PS2 emulator to try to get it to look as good as possible, but even playing it on a console, I think it's still a really good looking game. The texture quality is of a really high standard, along with all of the modelling and the animations for the enemy types, but aside from that, just the environments seem to feel very handcrafted, and each area you go to feels different from the last. Now, this is a game set in the Wild West, so don't be expecting to use Uzi 9mm or 40-watt plasma rifles. You can only hold 2 weapons at a time and you're pretty limited in what guns you're able to get your hands on, and everything is kind of grounded in the time period, despite their appearance being a bit more fantasy-like. So Jericho starts off with a horrible 6-shooter that you use for all of 2 minutes before it's quickly replaced with the Redeemer revolver, which kinda trumps it in every single way. You can even fan this bad boy if you hold down the fire button, which results in some pretty hefty recoil, but the benefit of killing whatever's on the other end. You're also able to dual wield at 1.2 with the Warmaker pistols, which feels more like shotguns than they do revolvers. But these things are pretty lethal at close range. I mean, the only downside is that you can't throw grenades when using them. Then there's a carbine and a long-range rifle, both pretty much essential against enemy snipers in the later levels. Then you've got a rocket launcher and a dynamite launching crossbow. Where have I seen that before? And finally, you've got the shotgun. And can we all just take a moment to appreciate the fact that the shotgun in this game also doubles as a goddamn battle axe? At times, I couldn't even hear the game over the sound of my erection. What the shotgun lacks a bit in raw stopping power, because let's be honest, it's a bit underwhelming in that regard, it sure makes up for it with the fact that the butt of it is the blade of an axe. And in fact, something the game doesn't really explain, but you'll figure out pretty quick, is that melee attacks in this game are really effective. I think maybe more so than actually firing weapons in certain instances. It seems the two-handed weapons like the rifles and the shotgun are all really powerful and used to hit bad guys. I mean, it might often take a couple of dozen shots from the weapon itself or 2 melee attacks instead. You can also appreciate the physics a bit more too, how the enemies are going to fly backwards when you return them to the afterlife with a well-timed melee hit. Outside of all these weapons, you'll also hop into a Gatling gun and then just get to shred through legions of monsters, which, unsurprisingly, never stops being awesome. Jericho's powers also add a bit of variety into the combat as well, so when you kill an enemy they seem to drop either health, energy or both, and that energy is what's used for Jericho's vampire powers. Some of these can be life-saving, so monitoring that meter and using the right ability at the right time can make all the difference. Darkwatch has also got a pretty cool dismemberment system where you can shoot off an enemy's limbs if you're accurate enough. A headshot will usually kill an enemy in a single hit, but that's easier said than done because of just how small the hitboxes are. But watching an enemy stumble around for a few seconds with no head before collapsing to the ground is oddly entertaining, no matter how many times it happens. There's an enemy type you come up against that are these big fat banditos, and you can literally blow chunks out of them. It's badass. Combine all of this with the physics engine, which can send corpses ragdolling or tumbling over ledges, and the shooting as a result feels pretty damn good. I mean, some weapons definitely lack a bit of an oomph factor and sound effects aren't as meaty as I'd like, but overall it just feels really good to play. So when you look at all the stuff I've said, the whole thing sounds pretty awesome, right? You've got a bunch of vampire powers to play with, some decent shooting mechanics, solid weapons, and a couple of big-breasted female companions to choose from.
Like what you see?
And you're probably wondering, where does it all go wrong? Well, for me, things started to get a bit crappy around halfway through the campaign. In the storyline at this point, you've been inducted as a Darkwatch regulator and you get to move freely around their citadel. Now, although you're told that no one trusts you at this point because you're a vampire, they still give you missions to go off and do for them. But the problem is that these missions are just kinda dog shit.
This weapon won't let you down.
The first one, you put in this little buggy thing that handles like a rusty shopping cart, and you have to avoid kamikaze enemies with explosive powder kegs, which is about as fun as blowing cayenne pepper up your butthole. The next one takes place during the day, and you're moving through a canyon to find this lost artifact, trying to avoid sunlight by keeping to the shadows. This is the only time in the entire game, outside of one other short stint, when they make you deal with the sunlight, and it sucks both times. Then the final mission, you're in this Native American village having to hold out against waves of enemies. I think the main reason I don't like these though is that they're just completely disconnected from one another in terms of the storyline between them. And they just kind of feel like filler in between the main campaign, which thankfully resumes right after you finish these 3 missions. I'd say that I hated this part of the campaign the most, and I think it's by far the worst part of the entire game. Luckily though, the last few levels in the game are again pretty damn good. There's some more vampire horseback riding, then you're blasting away from carriage to carriage on a train. Then a few impressive boss fights where you get to choose what ending you want. Not to mention, by this point, you've probably unlocked all of the vampire powers and can pretty much just bugger around and approach each gunfight however you want to, and it's a satisfying conclusion to the campaign. But when you get to that sort of speed hump in the middle of the game, you'll understand why this game got the scores that it did. Darkwatch, as a result, is sadly not a perfect game, and I think some of those weaker segments serve as a bit of a testament to that. The only other main thing that I can think of that bugs me is that the game is very light on humour. In fact, I don't think it really has any humorous moments at all. Look, a game about a vampire gunslinger hanging out with a smoking hot leather-clad female companion is the kind of game that should have some self-awareness. There's even a sex scene at one point that just kind of feels awkward, because I don't know if it's supposed to be silly and cheesy or if it's trying to take itself serious and maturely. Overall, Darkwatch just seems to play the story very straight and take itself very seriously, which is at odds with the stylish and almost cartoonish visuals. It also suffers from those afflictions you often see for console shooters from that time period, namely the janky aiming controls, which aren't bad but are atypical for how console shooters handled at the time. Aiming can be kind of tricky too, because whilst the game does have aim assist to an extent, it's really temperamental and doesn't always work properly. And then of course there's the FOV, which is pretty low and often makes seeing things at certain distances kind of tricky. I did have a list of other things I wanted to complain about, because I know people love to hear me complain. Like, I felt the balancing or cheapness of certain areas could be brought into question. There's also a bit of an overuse on populating later levels with the sniper type enemies, which isn't really difficult, it's just kind of annoying. But the game is pretty generous with health pickups and also checkpoints, so it's kind of a moot point. And I think most of that can be overlooked given the time this thing came out, but also because Darkwatch is probably one of the most unique shooting games ever made. The only other shooting game I can think of that's similar is probably Blood. I mean, it has a similar theme with an undead gunslinger taking on evil monsters and a powerful deity. Jericho can even fling a bundle of dynamite just like Caleb can. But Darkwatch still manages to stand apart on its own and be quite unique for the most part, and there's not really anything else quite like it, and I do think that's worth praising. It's the result of a game coming out during a period when the industry was just rife with creative and inventive titles. Apparently there was some kind of sequel in the works which was supposed to be released in 2007, and they even had a film that they were working on which also got canned. It's kind of a bummer because I think the foundation they'd laid with this first game was really solid, and it would have been good to see where they took things for a sequel. Getting a copy of the game for the Xbox or the PlayStation 2 seems to be easiest on eBay, but the pricing seems to range from as low as $10 all the way up to $80 or $90. $90 might seem a bit steep given its age, but that's kind of money well spent if you consider it's still one of the only games to let you ride on the back of a vampiric horse and kill zombies with a battle axe shotgun. If you ask me, that's damn good value.